What I'd like to do today is I'd like to start with the chat. And what I would like you to do, hi, honey, from Egypt. I'd like you to put in the chat something that triggers you and what sort of like really gets under your skin and sets you off. I'd love to hear what those are. So if you could put in the chat something that triggers you. Hi, Michael from Tucson. You know, we all have those moments when a switch flips suddenly and a volcano of angry or negative emotions erupts. And before you know what's happening, you say or do things that you'll surely regret later, but you can't stop yourself. Relationships, school, and work are all affected by this emotional dysregulation. So why does this occur, and what can you do differently to cope with it? So let's see some of the things that really trigger people. What do I have here? A lot of noise, crowds, minimizing my contribution to a project, crowds, a mess in my house, not being able to find the simplest thing. Anybody else have any things that trigger you? Because we want to identify the things that trigger us. And we particularly want to be able to identify the things that trigger us if we're a parent with kids, if we're partnered with our partner, because this is the place, or at work maybe, where we will be most likely to flip that switch and explode and not be able to manage our regulation very well. Melissa might say, too quick of a movement close to me. Leona says certain sounds. Too much on the table. I don't know if that means literally you have too much on your table or figuratively. Serena, a small place with no window. Repetition, Elena shares. So these are all really interesting. And I'm curious, what do you do when you're triggered? What happens when you're triggered? So if you can say, do you know, I know that for me, when I'm triggered, and one of the things that triggers me is people yelling at me or kind of being really self-righteous or not listening, and I will yell back. It's not the most useful thing that I do, but it's something that just that's my first reaction is like, don't talk to me that way. Don't talk to me in that volume. So Aaron, you're an organized file. Slava, partners past, certain topics. Michael, you take a timeout. I'm curious how you take that timeout. What kind of timeout? What do other people do? Shari, you yell. Yeah, I get you on that one. Anybody else? What do you do when you're triggered? Let's see. Some people pull in. Some people leave the room. Some people just shut down. Caleb says, I shut down, I blank out, I have to leave the situation. Aaron says, I yell. Melissa says, my daughter has special needs and doesn't understand my personal boundaries. When she runs or jumps at me, my skin crawls and I get tight-chested and struggle with frustration and try to step back and breathe. I can imagine that. Magdalene says, I punch things. So we all have different ways of coping with our triggers, and some are effective, some are socially acceptable, and some are not our best selves. So what do we want to do when we're feeling triggered to try to do a reset of the upset? So the first thing that we want to do is to understand the biology of what happens when we're triggered. So when we become angry or agitated, the emotional part of our brains, right here, the middle, in particular the amygdala, takes over our thinking brain, our prefrontal cortex. And you may know this as the amygdala hijack. And so what happens during these moments of an amygdala hijack is that feelings rule the day as adrenaline courses through our bodies, ratcheting up the intensity of our reactions, our words, and our behaviors. To restabilize, we have to stop this flood by slowing down your breathing, your heart rate, and your blood pressure, and using language to describe what's going on. But there's something between that adrenaline coursing through our veins and that ability to restabilize. And let's talk about what's happening when that adrenaline is coursing through your body and your brain. So one thing that happens is that your muscles will tense. There's actually more blood that's sent to the amygdala than sent to the prefrontal cortex. So your emotional brain is fueled more strongly than your thinking brain. You may experience a shortness of breath in an effort to kind of that demonstrates that you're getting ready to, fight, fight or flee, excuse me. You may start to perspire because when the adrenaline is coursing, the body needs to cool down. So all of these things are happening. So we have to notice the thing that triggers us, prepare to understand what it is that's triggering us. We have to notice the early stages of what's happening in our body so that we can then intervene and restabilize before we escalate. And I've defined this as 4 stages. So the first stage is the stage where you're in balance. It's the baseline. Okay, you're calm, you're going through your life, things are working out. The second stage is what I call a disturbance in the field. There's a little agitation you're noticing. Maybe your stomach kind of hurts a little bit, or you are feeling hot suddenly. That's a sign that something's happening, but you can manage it and you can talk to yourself about how to respond or talk back to the negativity. You've got it under control. The third stage is what I call I'm having a moment, so bear with me here. Activation. Thank you. Activation. And in this activated stage, adrenaline or cortisol is starting to come into your body. You are feeling an intensity with emotion. It's a little bit harder for you to put words to what you're feeling. There may be some kinds of distortions in terms of perceptions of what's going on, but you're not over the cliff. You're right up to the edge of that cliff. The fourth stage, high alert, you have now jumped over that cliff and you are now in a full force amygdala hijack. Your emotions are running the show. You are reacting, you're not responding. Your body's in a fight or flight mode. Even if there's not a tiger standing in front of you, there's a perceived danger, and your body is all about trying to manage the danger that it perceives. When you're in high alert, having someone tell you, "Oh, you know what, you really should calm down," is going to intensify your agitation, your fear, or your upset even more. What we have to do when we're in that high alert are 3 options. 1, leave the situation. Leave the situation so you are not being triggered and provoked when you're in it. 2, actually do some breathing exercises. And there are a couple different ones. We've probably practiced them here, but I just want to remind you there's alternate nostril breathing, five times. You could do 5 rounds of what I call triangle breathing. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, and exhale for 6. We need to let our system know that things are actually not out of control, and we're going to be using breathing to do that. For children, we could do smell the flower and blow out the birthday candle, or smell the hot chocolate and then blow on it to cool down. So there's breathing. So there's the leaving the situation. There's breathing. And then the final thing is using language. When we access language to describe what's going on, we are putting our prefrontal cortex back in the driver's seat of the car that is our brain, right? Because if we think about our car like a VW Bug, or maybe even I think Tesla, in the back the trunk is the engine. It's the physiological brain, the reptilian brain. It sends out it helps regulate heart rate and breathing and blood pressure to keep us alive. The middle of the brain is the emotional brain, also the mammalian brain, and that monitors not just our emotions, but it's where the thalamus is, which is like the relay station of the brain. It's also in the parts of the in this part of the brain is the seat of language and memory and the amygdala. And then the front of the brain is the prefrontal cortex, the human brain, the thinking brain. And so I think of the human brain as driving the VW bug. I think of the emotional brain in the back seat, and the physiological brain is the engine in the back of the car. And during an amygdala takeover, the emotional brain jumps into the front seat, elbows the thinking brain over to the far side of the passenger seat, and is steering you everywhere. Okay, we can use language when we talk back to the fear, or when we can say we can talk back to ourselves, that we can then move that emotional brain that helps move that back to the back seat, that combination of those three things. So let's see what some of the comments are so far about what I'm saying, because I've seen a lot of activity there. Let's see. Aaron, I yell. Michelle, I cry. A lot of women cry. Melissa, my daughter. Oh, you said that part. I'm sorry. Okay. Cassandra, walk away, shut down, yell. Depends on my mood and frustration at the time. Hi, Magdalena. Candy, I remove myself for quiet. Good. My brother and my sister yelling at me, and I yell back. Okay. Paul, I don't understand. I'm struggling with ADHD and autism. Talking doesn't help. No one understands it. If you're lucky, just put up with me. It's horrible. I hate ADHD meds. They make me feel useless. I'm sorry, Paul, that you're struggling so much. And actually, talking does help. It's one of the three interventions that I'm laying out. One is removing yourself from the situation so you can cool down. One is using breathing techniques so you can cool down. And the third one is being able to talk to yourself. I'm really dysregulated right now. I'm over the edge. I need to cool down. What's going to help me? What's a soother that helps me manage? Okay. That's how my son feels. Yeah, too bad I didn't realize this before. It helped destroy my marriage. I'm sorry to hear that, Dale. So I'm curious, for those of you who are here because you're a parent raising a child with ADHD, what kinds of things set them off? And I'd also like to hear, Paul, you said nothing helps. So I'm curious if from some of you, Oliver, you can't talk. Talking is the last sort of the three steps, because you have to be somewhat you have to be somewhat down regulated from high alert to activation to be able to access your language, because when you're in high alert, it's very difficult to access thinking at all. So I'm curious, you've all had histories where you've lost it, and then you feel bad afterwards. I know that I have. And what do you do when that happens? Like, what do you say to yourself? Usually if that's happened to me, and it particularly happened when I was raising my daughter, I would go into a shame spiral. I would just be like, what's wrong with you? You're a bad parent. You've got to hold it together. And that actually didn't help anything. It didn't help her, and it didn't help me. And it didn't help her because then I would come and kind of apologize profusely, but I would still do the same behavior. So apologizing profusely and then repeating the behavior actually doesn't help, because it doesn't show someone that you're willing to try to change one. And even if it's one small aspect of how you're responding to triggers, that's what our loved ones need to see. So let's see, what am I seeing? Jacinta, my 6-year-old son destroys his schoolwork or art when he makes a mistake. Leah, my daughter is triggered by being asked to do anything she does not want to do, including homework and losing screen time. Nikki, is the feed pausing or restarting for anyone else? I don't know. I'm sorry if that's the case. Okay, so there's a problem with the feed. Let me see if I can close all my tabs except this one, and that would help. 1 second. That might help the feed. Let me know if it's a little bit better now. I have closed all my tabs so that only this is open. Okay. Amy, my kids are set off by making mistakes, feeling pressured on time and sensory issues. My daughter is triggered by feeling she's being blamed, which happens even if that's not the case. That can actually occur. You'll feel blamed for something even if that's not what's happening. Sylvia, once my son calms down, we use it as a learning moment. Wonderful. Let's see. It's better now. The feed is fine. Okay, great. Maybe it was temporary. All right. Well, great. I'm glad it's not freezing anymore. Valerie, I agree. Sometimes I can hug him after a bit and the body sensation is calming for my son. So that leads us to the second point that I want to make. Well, first, I want to say, we want to teach our kids how to identify the signs of angry feelings building up inside of them and what tools they can use to slow themselves down. So we both want to understand what their experience of triggers are, things that set them off, what the signs are internally that they're being triggered, and then we want to work on tools that are self-soothers. Because yes, your son may want a hug from you, and that's wonderful. But sometimes your son may feel like he's having a really hard time or he's losing it and you're not around. How is he going to give that, sort of metaphoric hug to himself? A lot of kids do feel blamed about things. And thank you, Annie, for putting that, the information about rejection sensitivity dysphoria up. So what are we going to do? So part of the thing that works with triggers is that we have to understand how anger works and operates, rather than actually each time seeing anger as like, oh, this is a new type of anger, and I deal with that, and oh, it pops up over here, and then it's another type of anger, and then it pops up over here. It's like playing whack-a-mole. So what we want to do is we want to have a plan that we can rely on in an outburst, any outburst, because you'll have a strategy. So having a plan for explosions gives everybody in the family predictability about what's going to happen and what to do when these eruptions occur. I'm not sure why the live video keeps getting interrupted. I really am sorry about that. Annie, if you have an idea, let me know. I've shut off all of my everything on the browser, so I'm sorry, Dana. Okay, now I got distracted. Okay, so we want to have some predictability about what to do when these eruptions occur, that there's a strategy for overall eruptions rather than trying to wing it each time something happens. So instead of being surprised each time emotions heat up and you're improvising when you're upset, you want to rely on what I call the STAR sequence. Stop, think, act, recover. Okay, so let's see what's happening here in the chat. Okay, Wendy says, my child does not have tantrums or yell. He's very unfocused and ODD. Okay, Harlan, for me, I watched other people use the anger expression as a way to punish others more than express a genuine feeling. I found stop, breathe, and choose to respond to help me with this. And that's exactly what the STAR response is. Valerie, this is so helpful. Makes me understand how I can share this with the school because they're interested in having what works at home also be in place at school. Exactly. You want to, what I think it's really important that we actually have consistency between what's happening in school and the interventions in school and what's happening at home. Thank you, Harlan. Liz is saying that the live is unwatchable. And I hear from some people it's fine. It goes on and off, going off, fixed for you. Okay. You turned off your Wi-Fi and it worked. My Wi-Fi is on. So Jenna says, you mentioned you took your anger out on your daughter. I relate and feel so much shame every time I say I'm sorry every time. Would love ideas how to stop this. Um, Annie, could you maybe respond to Liz about why it's unwatchable? Dale, okay. So, my daughter, adolescence was challenging, and I was the person she pushed back at, and she would be very sort of nitpick everything that I would do, down to the detail of why this wasn't okay and why that wasn't okay. And it was hard for me, I mean, I think it's painful to be on the receiving end of that kind of persistent rejection and criticism. And my husband was not on the same end of that. He was on a different end where he didn't get it. And so I was angry a lot, and I was angry at her, and I was angry at the situation. That's very, it was painful. And so I really understand that not just mothers and daughters, mothers and sons can go through a lot of stuff as well, but in our house it was particularly mothers and daughters. So what we want to do to try to manage the upset, to reset the upset, is we want to rely on the STAR method. And Liz says, I have something wrong with me. I'm like furious and I can't stop it. Why? And that has to do with it has to do with the emotional regulation or dysregulation of the ADHD brain, because the feelings are so intense, and the certain executive functioning skills such as emotional control may be weaker. It's harder for the thinking brain to kind of put up the dam and say, back off, tidal wave of emotion. It's too much. Just there's a little hose here, come through that way. And so it's really very hard. So we have to learn to figure out what will soothe us, what will get us back to get us down that ladder from high alert to activation to disturbance in the field to baseline. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create this strategy. And it's a strategy we're going to come back to over and over again, because it's a strategy to deal with this dysregulation, these eruptions. And the first thing in that strategy is you're going to figure out how you're going to call a break in the action and use a predetermined time apart. Now, for younger kids, a time apart is difficult. They may not be able to do that. They may want a time in. I'm going to sit with you. I want to read a story. I'm not able to manage myself. And older kids may be like, awesome, 20 minutes, I'm going to my room. I'm going to do whatever. I'm going to listen to music, or I'm going to go on YouTube. I need to calm down. And for you, you may want to go and take a walk, or have a stretch, or do some yoga, or have a glass of water, or a nice cup of tea. So having a plan for these explosions is what helps minimize them. We want to understand also that a time apart is not a timeout. A timeout is a punishment. And so a timeout it makes kids feel like they're bad and they've done something wrong. And a time apart is we agree that we're all too activated to interact with each other, and we have to settle. And I prefer the term settle or slow down to calm down, because calm down often ratchets everything up. So we want to create a signal or a term for the family so everyone knows that we're beginning a slowdown and what we're going to do. So as I said, younger children might prefer to be with you for a hug, which might be hard for you to do, and a story. Tweens and teens might be much happier going to their room. But in a time apart, no one's in trouble. And that's the difference between a time apart and a timeout. It's just that things got too heated and a recalibration is in order. So we want to write down or use pictures for kids that can't read, a list of alternative activities. So for younger kids, I recommend going to the dollar store and creating a calm me down box that you bring out that they can use. Maybe it has a certain puzzle or some special art activity or a particular Lego or something. So all of those things can be very helpful. Maybe make a playlist of music that you like, have a coloring book, go outside and shoot some hoops. Um, Maybe jump on the trampoline. Some kids like to read, whatever it is. And then you want to post these soother activities along when you write up your STAR program. So we have the stop, and then with the stop will be also some of these self-soothing activities. And set a timer for somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes. And the reason that we set this timer is because it takes somewhere between it takes about 6 minutes for the cortisol in the body to dissipate, in the brain to dissipate, but it takes 10 to 20 minutes for the body to slow down. And so, yes, STAR stands for stop, think, act, recover. So we want to have enough time in our time apart for people to actually let their bodies relax enough so that they're ready to move on to the think. So think is a time to come back together and listen, really listen to what your child or teen is telling you, okay? Ask them to review what happened, what they would like to have done differently or wanted you to do differently, and any other feelings or observations. This is a time for conversation opener questions that begins with what, how, where, when. This is not a good time for why, because you're not going to get information, and we want to get information. I mean, you can throw a why in there, I guess, occasionally, but we really want to do like, what would have helped you? Or how would you have liked me to respond instead of what I did? That's the kind of stuff we want to ask for. Then we want to use that reflective listening tool. Reflect back what you hear them say. Okay, so what I heard you say is it would have been helpful for you if I hadn't told you were stupid when I got angry. Did I get that right? Is there anything else? Okay, so you're going to reflect back what you hear, but we're not teaching anything right now. This is not the time for teaching. This is just about speaking and feeling heard and seen, okay? And this is a time to acknowledge what they've said and be accountable yourself. I'm glad you're sorry that you told me I was a biatch, and thank you. I really appreciate it. And I myself feel very bad that I told you were an idiot. I feel bad about that. I'm sorry for that. So that you may or may not receive forgiveness, but we're still doing it. We're still going to say it anyway because we want to model for our kids what accountability looks like. This is not a time for interruptions. This is not a time for blame. Once everyone has spoken and felt heard, now we're going to go on to the next phase. It's time to figure out how to move on. You are ready to act. Act is the phase where you brainstorm ideas and use problem-solving techniques to go forward. What do we need to do to move forward? What is the next right thing we want to do? So we want to ask them, where should we go now? What do you think we should do? And whether that is an apology or making an amends. I'm really big in making amends, like you throw your plate of eggs on the floor because you don't want to have eggs. We're going to call a time apart when we come back. What do you think making amends would look like? Well, I guess I should pick up my plate and clean up the eggs. That would be great. Thank you. Okay. One of my clients this week told me that his son has been very angry because they removed the privilege of using a phone because he was misusing it. And he was so angry he spit on his father's car before he went to school. And when he came home, the father said, there will be nothing that will occur until the car is cleaned. So no privileges of any kind. Here's the bucket, and you'll need a sponge and some water to do that. And he cleaned the car because he understands that we need to make amends. So we're redirecting. That's exactly right, Kelly. So So whether it's an apology or making amends, cleaning up a mess, or agreeing to disagree, um, Kelly, I'll get back to you about that. We want to start meeting them where they are. You're not lecturing them about what they did wrong, disciplining them, or explaining the future pitfalls of whatever poor choice they made. Instead, this is collaborative about identifying the next logical step to pivot to move on from this experience. The time for teaching a lesson, for explaining a logical consequence, or offering feedback is later, so people can say settled and calm now. One of the biggest mistakes that parents will do is they'll have this time apart and they'll come back together and they'll start to tell their kids why they did what they did was wrong, and they'll start up the whole argument again. And I see this particularly between couples. This will happen with couples all the time. They'll have this big argument, they'll storm off, come back together, and they start the whole argument all over again. So Kelly has asked about de-escalation. So the de-escalation part actually starts in with the stop. You see the stop, you're calling a break so things do not continue to escalate, and then all of these stages help not just continue that process of de-escalation, but also the process of learning to pivot and move on while making amends, being accountable, and figuring out what the next right thing is for us to do. Time to process is a pause. Yes, so that actually is part of the stop. We're calling a pause in the action. Now, the last step is recover. So recover is so you've now had act where you decide what you're going to do to move forward, and recovery is what happens during the moving forward part. Okay, you're going into your next activity and you're letting your kids do the same. You're not holding a grudge. Everybody needs some time and space to process what's just happened without triggering another eruption. Several hours later, or maybe the next day or before bed, you can find a quiet time and talk about what lessons did they learn. You want to ask them first, and then you might want to share something that you observed or you've wondered about. We always want to ask the child or teen first what they think, because we want to work with what their perceptions are rather than just tell them what we see and why that's the right thing. That actually is not collaborative, and it's actually the type of parenting that's really a one-down type of parenting with finger wagging. And that's not really going to help kids with ADHD, kids with learning disabilities, or who are on the spectrum, learn skills. And our job as parents is to teach our kids executive functioning skills. And that's why we want to practice the STAR process for upset reset. Okay, so let's see what is happening here in the chat. Valerie asks, how do you get the other parent on board with the holding off recovery being collaborative if they feel strongly about discipline punishment before the last STAR step? So I think it's really important to talk to your partner and help them understand that actually punishment has been found over and over again in the research not to help kids, because it doesn't teach them any skills. It just teaches them fear. You do this thing, this bad thing is going to happen to you. You do this thing, this other bad thing is going to happen to you. It doesn't teach them, oh, you know what, I have to put the have to before the want to, or I want to do this good thing so that I can earn this better thing. Okay? There are two types of consequences we want to focus on with kids: natural consequences and logical consequences. Natural consequences are things that happen naturally. You don't wear a coat and it's 30 degrees outside and you're going out for the night, you're 13 years old. What do I need a coat for? The natural consequence is you'll be cold. You might get a cold also. That's a separate issue. Now, that's a conversation to have. And I will say that at one time with my daughter, she was in 9th grade, and it was literally 20 degrees on New Year's Eve. And our town has a a big first night outside, lots of activities. And she came downstairs with her like crop top and her fake leather jacket, purple leather jacket. She's like, okay, I'm ready to go. And I was like, no, you cannot go out with a short sleeve crop top and a fake leather jacket when it's 20 degrees because you're someone who gets colds easily. And when you get colds, I have to stay home from work and I'm not happy about it. And you miss school. So I'm sorry, but you need to go upstairs and change. In fact, I wasn't sorry. I didn't even say that. I said, you need to go upstairs and change. And there was a whole brouhaha about this with me, not in one of my better moments, blocking the door, the front door of my house, saying, screaming, you will not go out until you have a coat. Am I proud of this? No. Does it feel vulnerable to tell you this? Yes. Am I telling you this for a reason? Yes. I could have done that differently. I'm not sure how. I don't think I got enough support from my husband at the time. And so I think I could have done that differently because I could have stated, I'm concerned that when you go out dressed like this, you'll get sick. And that has negative consequences in your life and in mine. Ultimately, she went out, she had a coat, she said, but I'm not wearing a hat. I was like, don't wear a hat, whatever. So, it's hard. She was impulsive and she needed to exert control, and that was hard. On the other hand, logical consequences are, something that has to do with a choice that you made. So, for example, you don't turn in your payment for driver's ed by the deadline, and then you can't take the class. That is a logical consequence. It's also a natural consequence, actually. A logical consequence might be, okay, you drive my car when I go visit grandma for the weekend, and even though you're not allowed to drive my car, but when I'm not around, and then you have a fender bender in the parking lot of the grocery store, and now we have to get the car fixed. So a logical consequence is you're going to do all the steps with me to get the car fixed. So that means you won't be using a car. You'll be riding your bike, even if it's January. 2, you'll sit with me while I call the insurance company, and you'll be home when the estimator comes. And then you'll come with me when I go to 2 or 3 body shops to get an estimate. Then you won't have the car. None of us will have the car, of course, when it's in the shop. So you may not be able to do certain social things. And then when the car is back, we're going to go back towards driving together for a while so that I can make sure that you're driving safely. So that's the difference between a logical consequence and a natural consequence. A punishment would be, you drove my car, you will not be driving any car for 3 months. But it doesn't teach him or her what to do when they have a car issue. So this is the point of that. Okay. I can count the number of times I told my wife to meet all our children where they are, especially our ADHD son. I can't count the number of times. Okay. Dale. Consequences are not punishments. Consequences work over time. Punishments build resentment and more hiding, masking, fooling. Amen, Harley. Nicely said. Thank you. Okay. Karen, thanks for sharing. Helpful to know even the pros lose their cool. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's better now, but that was really tough for a while, Perimenopause and adolescence, not a great mix for my house. Natural consequence. I've heard that. You're welcome for the reminders. Hold on. I agree. Thank you. So more on that. Thank you, Annie, for posting that. I appreciate that. It's still my experience that telling them once or twice is enough. It can be, particularly if you're using, we've talked about my rule of 3, where you make eye contact, you state your direction, and they state the direction back, not once, but twice, so that it travels down the memory line and they can hold on to it. That's really important. I think it's really, I think in these issues, did I apologize for the way I behaved to my daughter on that New Year's Eve? You bet. Does she still remember it 9 years later? Oh, yes. Does she carry the blame that's sort of at the same level of the shame that I carry? No, no, she doesn't. So I think that, it's just something that we want to try to do to manage ourselves. My 5 C's: self-control, compassion, collaboration, consistency, and celebration. They are all based on the very first one, which is self-control. And I'm putting here in the chat a free downloadable for you on anger that you can get when you go to my website. So, I imagine and I know that in families living with ADHD, when parents are dysregulated, it is much harder for kids to regulate themselves. And when kids are defiant or spirited, it can be hard to determine, like, what is ADHD, what is adolescence, what's appropriate, what's not. And it's a mix, right? We can't tease out the adolescence and pull out the ADHD. It's all part of the mix of growing up. So what we can do as adults is to say, I need to manage myself. I need to manage myself better. And that, over time, is what has made a difference in my relationship with both of my children, with my husband, and with myself. I think about that self-control. What do I need to do when I'm starting to get activated? What is the feeling that I have in my body when I'm feeling triggered, and what do I do? And I'll tell you, to be perfectly honest, I do one of 2 things. One, I go to the bathroom. I just close the door, I wash my hands, I might splash some water on my face, I look in the mirror and I say, you can do this. You've got this. It's okay. The second thing that I do, breathing. I will do the triangle breathing anytime, anywhere. I'll sometimes do the alternate nostril breathing, although that's a little more cumbersome because people see you do this and they think that's so weird. But people don't witness you breathing in for 4, holding for 4, and exhaling for 6. And that has really helped a lot. Also, mindfulness, I really want to talk about that. And we did talks in the past about mindfulness, but having some self-compassion, that second C, compassion, having compassion for yourself, that you will lose it. We are imperfect. We are perfectly imperfect is what I want to say. We are imperfect beings, all of us. And we're all doing the best we can with the resources we have available to us in any given moment. We're doing that, and our kids are doing that. We're going to stumble. They're going to stumble. That's okay. It's what you do after what you do with the stumble and after the stumble, and what ways you attempt, even small, to shift your behavior so that it doesn't look the same over and over again. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Kelly. Yes, that would be great if you'd want to do that. Do I have a printable describing activation? I think it would be a helpful word for everyone in my home to be able to identify and name. I don't, thank you, Dale. I do have a graphic, a slide graphic that I can ask my assistant to put into a downloadable, and then I can bring it in 2 weeks. If you please remind me of that to bring it, I'll do that. But yes, I'm happy to create a printable describing those 4 stages of baseline, disturbance in the field, activation, and high alert. So we have time for a few questions or comments. I've given you a lot of information today. It's been like a little mini webinar. I'm sorry if you want to ask questions. So I'm going to stay on to 4:50 so we have time for questions. So let's see. Well, where were you when I was raising my kids? I don't know, Robin. I was probably, in the middle of raising my own and developing, the thoughts I've had. You've tried to get it, but it won't submit. Okay, I can't, I'm just going to put, paste it again for you. Oops, here we go. And the star is stop, think, act, recover. Okay. And I think it's important because you can just hold on to it. The star, the star, the star. What's the star? And I wanted to give you something today, and I hope this was useful. And I know you probably have more questions, and I encourage you to come back with these questions. But next week in the United States is Thanksgiving, and that's a holiday with a lot of complicated history. And I think that my gratitude toward you is enormous for showing up each week and for sharing your lives with me and for being in this community. So thank you. Linnell, yes, some of this information is in my book. A lot of this, somebody asked, a lot of this is for parents. What do you do for yourself? The same thing. The same thing. Stop, think, act, recover. You cause a pause in the action. You take some time apart. You get your body more relaxed. You think about how, when, and what you would like to do differently. You reflect on what you think the next thing what the next step forward would be, and you give yourself some space and time to recover, and then you can come back and think about how do I want to change, or do I owe any apologies, or etc. So STAR is for kids, for parents, but it's also for adults, and it's the same thing with the activation model. Baseline, disturbance, activation, and high alert. It's the same thing for adults. So let's see, there are some more questions. So useful. Thank you. I needed this week. Good stuff. Thank you, Marissa. Being raised on a farm where you see someone put a finger on a nostril, you want to get out of the way because they aren't breathing in. Thank you, Dale. Starts with us guardians. You mentioned being present. Colleen, how do I get my ADHD child to answer a question honestly and not just what I want to hear so they can get rid of me? Well, that's a great question. I'm going to answer that and then we'll stop. So, you know, I would suspect your child is a teen. And I think in those moments, it would be great to ask questions that don't start with why, but that start with how, what, when, and where. And there's a difference, like between honesty and lying. Honesty is open. There's eye contact. There's a story that actually unfolds that makes sense. Lying, you know, there's sort of a hidden aspect to it, although some kids are very good and will look you in the eye and lie to your face. But as you unravel their story, it may not make sense. So I would try to talk to them about what makes it hard to tell you the truth, because often kids don't tell the truth because they're afraid of your reaction. They're afraid they're not going to get to do something they want, or you'll take something away. So have a conversation about, you know, honesty, or getting, you know, what makes it hard to share what's really going on. Maybe they feel like you're asking too many questions. And then could you set up something where you get to ask one question a day that they answer honestly. Okay. You're welcome, everybody. I turn T into take time away and think, sort of a star for me. I usually need to walk away and literally walk before the think is ready, before the act. I love that. I love that, Harlan. I think that's really actually extremely helpful, because maybe that it should be that star. But we don't say pause. What was the word used? Oh, you can say pause. You can say we're going to take a pause in the action. We're going to do a time apart. And I talk about this, if you want more information, I talk about this on my website. There's plenty of free resources, and on my YouTube channel as well. I give up trying to get it. Won't let me submit it all. You can't get the downloadable. Is anyone else having trouble with the downloadable? Okay, I don't know if anyone else is having trouble with the downloadable. Again, if you're having trouble with it, I can resubmit it. I'll check that, and we can next in 2 weeks when we meet again. I will make sure to post that as well. So I'll look for the anger downloadable. I'll send you something on the activation model, the stages of activation, and then whatever else I'm talking about next week. Michelle, you got it. Okay, good. So you might want to try a different browser if you can't get it. So again, thank you so much for being here. I feel very grateful for this community. We've been together for a while now, and it really is like it's the highlight of my week. It's a wonderful way to end on Friday. So thank you. And thank you, Adhd, for hosting. We will not be meeting next week because of the holiday in the United States, but we'll be back in 2 weeks. And I'm really excited to see you then. So take care. Thanks for joining and have a good weekend.